probably heard this story before. The greatest library in the ancient world, home to hundreds of thousands of scrolls, burned to the ground in one catastrophic fire. Maybe it was Julius Caesar's fault. Maybe it was a religious mob. Maybe it was a conquering caliph who decided the books were either heretical or unnecessary and torched them all in a single afternoon. It's a great story. Dramatic villain, tragic loss, a clean lesson about the dangers of fanaticism. It's also almost entirely fiction. Here's what actually happened to the Library of Alexandria, according to the historians who've spent decades trying to untangle fact from legend. And it's a story that should bother you more than the fire ever did, because there's no villain to blame, just centuries of a civilization slowly deciding that something didn't matter enough to save. Let's start with Julius Caesar, since he usually gets blamed first. In 48 BC, Caesar found himself trapped in Alexandria during a conflict with the Egyptian court. He set fire to enemy ships in the harbor to cover his escape. That fire spread to nearby buildings. Ancient sources do mention scrolls burning that day, but modern historians believe what burned was warehouse storage near the docks, an overflow collection, not the main library itself. Caesar's own written account of the campaign mentions burning the fleet. He never claims to have destroyed a library. That detail got added by later writers, centuries after the fact, retelling a story that had already started to grow in the telling. Then there's the second suspect, a Christian mob in 391 AD, supposedly burning the library to the ground during a religious riot. Here's the problem. Historians have 5 separate contemporary accounts describing the destruction of the Serapeum, the temple that housed what was left of Alexandria's book collection by that point. Not one of those 5 accounts mentions a library burning at all. The most likely explanation is uncomfortable in a quieter way. By 391 AD, the Great Library probably didn't meaningfully exist anymore. There wasn't much left to burn. And the third suspect, the one you've probably heard most often, a conquering Arab caliph in 642 AD, ordering the library's books destroyed because, as the legend goes, if they agreed with the Quran, they were unnecessary, and if they contradicted it, they were heretical. This story doesn't appear anywhere in the historical record until 13 centuries after the conquest happened. No early Arab, Coptic, or Byzantine source from anywhere near that time period mentions it. Historians widely consider it a much later legend, invented long after anyone who could have contradicted it was gone. So, if none of the dramatic fires actually did it, what did? The real answer is slower, and in some ways, harder to sit with. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just a building full of scrolls. It was a living institution that required constant, expensive maintenance to survive. Papyrus is fragile. It doesn't last centuries on its own. It rots in damp air. It gets eaten by insects. It crumbles with age. The only way a text survived was if someone kept recopying it, again and again, onto fresh papyrus, generation after generation, before the old copy fell apart completely. That took money. It took trained scholars willing to spend their lives on it. It took a government stable enough to keep funding an institution that produced no immediate return, just the slow accumulation of preserved knowledge. For a while, the Ptolemaic kings who ruled Egypt were happy to pay for exactly that. The library became a symbol of their power and sophistication, and they funded it accordingly. But empires don't stay stable forever. As political instability grew across the following centuries, wars, changes in leadership, economic strain, funding for the library slowly dried up. Fewer scholars, fewer resources for the constant work of recopying deteriorating scrolls, the kind of quiet, unglamorous maintenance that never makes it into dramatic retellings, because there's no single moment to point to. No villain, no fire, just a slow withdrawal of the resources that had kept the whole system alive. Once that copying system broke down, the outcome was basically inevitable. Texts that weren't recopied in time simply crumbled into nothing. Not destroyed by an enemy, just left to decay, the way anything left unmaintained eventually falls apart. By the time later fires and riots did occur, the library that people picture in the popular story, hundreds of thousands of scrolls, the greatest concentration of ancient knowledge in one place, had already been fading for generations. Those later incidents may have finished off whatever fragments remained, but they weren't the cause of the loss. They were more like a funeral for something that had already been dying for a very long time.
Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. We don't actually know what we lost. Ancient references mention plays by Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides that we know existed because other ancient writers quote them or refer to their titles. But the actual texts never survived antiquity. The same is true for entire schools of pre-Socratic philosophy, early Greek historians, countless poets whose names appear in surviving lists, attached to work nobody alive today has ever read. We can't even say for certain how much of that specific loss happened at Alexandria versus libraries and archives that faded elsewhere across the ancient world in the exact same slow, unglamorous way. The honest answer is that nobody kept a careful record of exactly what disappeared because nobody realized in the moment that they were watching something irreplaceable slip away.
That's the uncomfortable core of this whole story, and it's a pattern this channel keeps circling back to. Knowledge doesn't usually die in one dramatic moment. It's rarely a villain with a torch. It's much more often a society that simply stops prioritizing the unglamorous, expensive, invisible work of maintaining what it already has. Alexandria didn't lose its library to religious fanatics or conquering armies. It lost it to something far more familiar: underfunding, low prioritization, and the slow, distracted neglect of an institution that everyone assumed would just always be there, right up until it wasn't. It's worth sitting with that, because the myth of the single fire lets us off the hook a little too easily. Fires have villains. Neglect doesn't. Neglect just has all of us, quietly deciding year after year that maintaining something matters a little less than whatever feels urgent today. The scrolls of Alexandria didn't need an enemy to disappear. They just needed everyone to stop noticing they were fading, until it was too late to matter.
Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If this made you think differently about something you thought you already understood, that's exactly what this channel is for. Subscribe to Vanished Knowledge, and I'll see you in the next one.